To the Bennington Tonight Show. This is produced by Mr. Mike Bethel, and tonight we will be hearing from our Select Board candidates, and I'm Shawn Marie Oler, and to my right is Jeff Grimshaw, and to his right is John Goodrich. They will introduce themselves, then I will introduce the candidates. They've sent me short bios. The format for this evening is that Jeff and John will ask questions of each of the candidates. They will all get an opportunity to answer. They'll have 2 minutes, which I will time on one of these machines. And then we will open up questions for the audience after we've asked a number of questions. And then they will have 3 minutes each to wrap up the evening. We're hoping we'll be here for 90 minutes. And welcome. So, Jeff?
Good evening. My name is Jeff Grimshaw. I run Southern Vermont Today, and I'm also lucky enough to be a part owner of the Southern Vermont Storm football team. That's you.
I'm John Goodrich. I'm John Goodrich, and I started Mace. I think some of you knew that, and I own the large mill called Vermont Mill Properties over on Benmont Avenue.
Sorry.
And I am going to introduce the candidates by alphabetical order, which means that the two Jeans who are currently on the school board go first. That's simply because of where they're...
Select board.
What did I say?
School board.
Too many years there. Okay, Jean Connor. Jean Connor's mother taught her it's important to be involved and give back to your community. So that's what she's done. Soon after moving here to Bennington in 1989, Jean served on the board of Bennington Project Independence. She served on the BSD board for 8 years. Currently, she's on the Shire's Housing Board as vice president. Jean is running for her second term on the Bennington Select Board. Directly after college for several years, Jean taught children with special needs in Maryland and New Jersey. For the next decade, she raised her children and volunteered at their local schools. Jean has worked in development since 2008 for nonprofits in both Bennington and Williamstown. She and her husband Tony have 2 grown children who were raised in Bennington. One stayed in Vermont, one lives in Brooklyn, but both love coming home to visit. Then we have Jeannie, who's over there in the middle. Jeannie is a current select board member seeking a second term. She and her husband, Michael Mishkin, have lived in Bennington for close to 30 years. Their 2 children both graduated from Mount Anthony Union High School. Both are currently in graduate school and would love to move back to Vermont. Now, this part is a mouthful, Jeannie. Jeannie sits on several economic development groups, including the Bennington County Industrial Corp., the Bennington Downtown Alliance, the Regional Economic Development Group, and the Bennington Economic Development Partners. She co-chairs the Bennington County Workforce and Education Working Group and serves as the Workforce Investment which serves as you can correct me if I say this wrong, Workforce Investment Board for the county. She is a regular attendee at the Bennington Building Bright Futures Council for Early Childhood Education and is co-chair and a volunteer of the Seedlings Program. Jeannie is a longtime coordinator of academic services at the Community College of Vermont. Did I do okay?
You did. Thank you.
Bruce Lee Clark, that's hyphenated,
Yes.
has lived in Bennington since 1995. Prior to coming to Bennington, he served as an ordained United Methodist minister in several upstate New York communities since 1977. He attended Syracuse University College of Law and after graduation was a staff attorney for Legal Services of Central New York, where he ran legal services program representing people with HIV and AIDS. Upon coming to Bennington, he was hired to teach at the Southwest Vermont Career Development Center, where he developed and taught the pre-law program as well as forensics and other related courses. He retired in June of 2018. He served on the SVSU Policy Drafting Committee as well as the CDC Policy Committee. He was the president of the board of the Greater Bennington Interfaith Community Services Board for the first 6 years of its operation, where it operated the Bennington Free Clinic, the Emergency Food and Fuel Fund, and the Kitchen Cupboard Food Pantry. He is married to his wife Mary, has 2 grown children, and a pretty new grandchild.
Yes.
Bill Scully, William Bill, in parentheses, Scully, is a graduate of Bennington College, class of 2018, an accomplishment that took him 28 years. He is an entrepreneur and the most successful businesses of, He is an entrepreneur and the most successful businesses of his have one thing in common. He was repeatedly told they were impossible. He thrives on challenges and believes that anything can be accomplished by transforming impasse into design concerns. As a result of his approach, he and his wife, with a mere $14,000 net worth in 2001, started 9 successful Vermont companies. He ran most of them while simultaneously working as Bennington College's Director of Dining Services. Bill has a broad background in civic duty. Among his community efforts, he co-founded the North Bennington Living History Day, participated in drafting the Vermont Agency of Commerce Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy, SEDS, planning effort, and was trustee for the Village of North Bennington Board from 2013 to 2018. Wow, I should have had that broken up by other people reading. So
That's okay.
you can add to that at the end if I mispronounce something. Jeff, would you like to start? And I think what we'll do is we'll start with Jean, and then we'll just go down, and then we'll start with Bruce, and then we'll start with Jeannie, and so forth and so on, because last time I had Bruce to keep track of me.
Very good. Thank you. And thank you to all the candidates and current select board members for everything you do and everything that you hope you will do. I'd like to just get the elephant out of the room with this first question and ask simply, where do you stand on the proposition to change the town charter, which is on the ballot this year, to one day allow for the possibility of governance by mayor?
I feel very, can you hear me? Want me to move this? Okay. I am not in favor of a mayoral system of government, and I have never been in favor of that form of government since I've lived here. It's come up several times, and I've repeatedly voted no. This time, however, because I'm on the select board and I'm a little wiser, I probably have a little, my reasons are a little bit more well thought out. I believe that even though we would have a mayor, we still would need a town manager because the skill set, the education, the experience that the town manager has, I don't think could be replicated in a mayor. I guess it's possible, but I think it's highly, highly unlikely, so I don't see the need for a town manager to go away. Is that 2 minutes?
I didn't start timing again, another 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. The other reasons are I believe that a mayor system would affect the candidates for who would want to be running for the select board. I think the makeup of the board needs to be made up of different people with different vantage points, and I think a mayor would promote more of a political kind of dynamic where the select board would need to be in support of the mayor, and I think that that's a really bad way to make decisions. I think we need to have different points of view, people of different ages, people that have done different things in their lives. So those are probably my 2 top reasons. I'm going to stop talking because they may have things they want to add to that answer, to that question.
Well, I'm going to take it from a slightly different tack because I actually don't think that the issue is whether or not Bennington wants to have a mayor. I have my own opinions about that, and I'm happy to tell you that I actually think it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing, but I think we need to have much more dialogue about it. This is an innate piece of enabling legislation. It doesn't predetermine that Bennington would have a mayor. And what it would do is change the charter in order to allow for that possibility. I actually grew up in an area, in a town that had a mayor and had a manager. And it was not quite a weak mayor process. I noted that in the banner that there were mayors who went from around Bennington or from around Vermont and went to Montpelier just a little over a week ago to advocate on behalf of their towns and in concert together. I actually like the thought. I would agree with you that the skill set is an issue. I actually, though, have spent 20-some years teaching civics and thinking about what it means to have an elected person accountable to the electorate. And I think that accountability at the very core is important. I think it happens with the select board, but I also think it could happen, could very well happen if Bennington chooses the mayor. Right now, you can't even do it because I don't think the current charter, as we passed it last spring, and as the legislature is addressing it, I don't think it allows for that. That's my personal reading of it. So I would be, I'm going to vote in favor. The language of this particular charter change makes it feel like it's an either or, and I actually don't think it is. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you.
Well, I strongly believe that having 7 elected officials making decisions in the open with absolute transparency is as democratic as we can get. And I strongly support having that kind of system and that kind of diversity on a board so that you are able to both impact and hear from your elected officials so that it's not one person making that decision. When I look around at smaller communities, all have some kind of administrative help, whether it's a manager or whether it's an administrative person. You need a steady hand to run a community. And the size of Bennington requires someone with a lot of skill to not only do hiring and firing, but to keep up with all the government regulations, to help advise the select board on legal matters, just to keep the infrastructure running in a town. So I can't see that a mayor would ever be able to do that. I think that the level of knowledge and the longevity of having someone that's not going to be at the political whim of the electorate is really important for the management role. So, I see the role of a select board as being vision and policy. I like the idea that there's 7 people having that conversation. I really think that the process that Tom Jacobs has put in place, where anything that select board is making a decision about has to have 2 hearings, has to have a 2-meeting hearing, so that the first meeting is hearing from the public, and then there is a discussion period, and then there is a second meeting where the select board actually has deliberation in public. So I think a mayor would not give us anything except another $80,000 position in the town, and so I would not support it.
Well, I think right out of the gate, I'm going to give you the politician's answer of I haven't made up my mind yet, which is true. And I spent a lot of time actually researching this because I was troubled by the fact I couldn't make up my mind. I see pros and cons for both positions. I think that there's the obvious liability of having somebody who's unqualified that would actually win an election simply by that person being popular. But on the flip side, I also see a lot of benefit to debating the direction of the town at the highest levels of government and bringing in new ideas, and I would like to see that happen. That said, there's other ways to accomplish that. I think in Bob Madison's 2010 report, and I think if anybody doesn't know, Bob Madison was probably the biggest advocate for a mayor for at least 35 years in this town that I've ever seen. But he pointed something out really succinctly, that he said that the current government structure is not poised for dynamic policy change, which I think is partially true. I think it can be. So I think regardless of which way this election goes, I think the thing that we have to remember is that the town manager serves at the pleasure of the select board, and the select board can actually affect dynamic policy change. It's a matter of whether or not the select board is comprised of people who are going to be willing to do that and able to do that.
Thank you. John,
I'm up.
you are?
Well, Mr. Grimshaw and I both agree that we're thrilled that you're running and that you're also qualified. It makes me a little embarrassed to be asking you the questions since you're so qualified. But I'll start with one question, is they've increased the advertising for Bennington to $50,000, I believe, from a $15,000 budget, if I'm not wrong.
50.
Yes, now 50,000, yeah. And my question to you is, do you think that's enough for a business that has an income of $13 million? Do you think that advertising of only $50,000 is enough money?
Bruce, you're up.
Yeah. This could be a very short answer. I think the answer is no. It's not enough. But it's also a question of how do you spend what you spend. And I know that the proposal that came up before the board a couple of weeks ago was intended to ramp up fairly quickly, but even then only into the 110,000 or 120,000. To me, it's really a question not just of how much money, but 50,000 is not enough, but also how that money is spent, who spends it, what's the nature of the contract that the town has with whoever that is. And at this point, I am incredibly unclear about all of the answers to those questions. The presentation, interesting, well put together, but again, by a number of people who were saying, well, we're willing to volunteer our time for the first year. I'd like to work on a whole lot more concrete nature than that. I like to have a contract where I can hold people accountable, and right now I am not sure that we're in that place. So the short answer is no, 50,000 is not enough. This is I would like to see a lot more. I also know that money is tight and the grand list isn't growing. So I would say it's not enough, and I would like to see a whole lot more concrete plans before I were to even invest 50,000.
Thank you, Bruce.
Well, I would also agree 50,000 isn't enough, but it's what we had. And I think it's a really great opportunity for us. The fact that we have leading businesses step up to say that they will jumpstart a process, which saves us an enormous amount of money out of the gate. We don't have to educate these businesses about what Bennington offers. They can jump in and get the website up and running, and also really make some strategic moves on social media. They can also, because of their connections in this community, connect us with all three of the ongoing marketing initiatives that are already in place, the So Vermont initiative, which connects Bennington and Windham County, and also the Shires marketing, which connects us north and south, and in addition, the state efforts, which are stay-to-stay, remote worker project, and things like that. So I think 50,000 is not enough. This is a first-year initiative. There will have to be connections. I mean, I think when we get a community development director in place, we will have to figure out what that agreement is. But, I think it's a heck of a lot more than we've had in the past, and I'm very excited about where it can take us.
Thank you, Jeannie. Bill?
So I should watch the clock on this one.
Here.
So my answer is I'm really happy to see the 50,000. I'm really happy to see, Lynn and other people working on this, volunteering their time, and I would say unquestionably it's not enough. But even more so, I think more important to that in my mind is answering the question of what are we trying to do here? What's the goal? Are we trying to create an artificial market downtown like a mall or a shopping center or something like that? I mean, that's totally fine, and we can do that, But $50,000 is really an amount you're going to throw at retention of the people you have, which I think is a necessary first step in any kind of revitalization of the downtown, is going to be retaining the people that are there. But I think long-term, we have to look at Bennington. I mean, this town was formed simply because of the water resources, and those water resources are what created a thriving middle and upper class in this town. And by the end of the Second Industrial Revolution, Bennington was a key part in the U.S. becoming the world leader in the end of the Industrial Revolution. I mean, imagine that today. Can you imagine Bennington, Vermont being key to the U.S. on the national stage? It's almost unthinkable. So when I look at that, the downtown is simply a byproduct of that industrial infrastructure that we had, which is a result of the natural resources that we have, which we now don't use. And thank you, Jim Sullivan, for putting a number to it. Conservatively, that's $100 million every year that leaves Bennington. That's the elephant in the room. If you want a thriving downtown, you need a thriving community. To have a thriving community, we need to actually access the natural, renewable, or other resources that we have. There's your $100 million. There's your middle class. There's your upper class. Retaining that every year, that gets you your downtown. In the interim, I'd like to see more, but $50,000, again, and all the effort by other people is great at retaining what we have. It just doesn't build anything, I don't think.
Well, I'll be the fourth one to say $50,000 is not enough. However, this incredible opportunity presented itself to us, and the expertise that these three people possess was something we absolutely could not refuse, and why would we? So I guess for me, I trust that they will do great things in a short amount of time, and we're just going to have to see where it goes from there. I don't think having every single I dotted and every single T crossed before we were, going to move down this road was necessary. I think we needed to seize the opportunity and build on it and let them work their magic, and we'll see where it goes. And I just wanted to clarify one thing. The marketing that they're going to be doing is not just for downtown, it's for the whole town. It's not just downtown, so I just wanted to clarify that. And I welcome their expertise and their ideas, and I support them 100%.
Thank you.
All right, I guess back to me. Other than a once-a-year legislative breakfast, we don't perceive that there's a lot of interaction between the Select Board and the state government in Montpelier. Our sources indicate that in Bennington, because of a rash of negative news stories that have bled onto the state, that Bennington has become a bit of a pariah with upstate legislators and is not seen in a real good light. So the question is, what can you and the Select Board do to create a much better relationship, not only with our own area representatives, but from other parts of the state to better improve our image and our worth?
That would be Jeannie, right?
Yes, thank you. Well, so first of all, I think that we have a fairly strong relationship with our own legislative team. So just a couple examples of that would be, I co-chair the Workforce and Education Working Group, and we meet monthly, and each month we have our legislative team, at least some portion of it, attends those meetings, and they actually engage in the work that we do, to the point that Bill Botso actually sponsored a bill that group wrote last year to help bring money to small businesses in southern Vermont. I think another place where there's very good interaction is, I'm thinking the Bennington County Industrial Corporation. Bill Colvin has actually testified, 4 times already before the Commerce Committee on behalf of Bennington County. So, and that's just the workforce area. The same thing exists in the early ed community. So, in the communities that I am part of, I do know that there is regular back and forth conversations, and that the legislative team does engage. Can we do more? Absolutely. We can always do more. I think inviting them to come as often as we can. I mean, a lot of our groups meet on Monday mornings so that the legislative team can come in before they head back to Montpelier. But I do think there's always work that can be done. And yes, I think we can always improve. Thank you.
Thank you. I actually feel like I have a really good connection with our legislators. I almost every year end up going to Montpelier. So I feel like I have a good connection. I don't feel disconnected as far as improving how the other parts of the state and specifically Montpelier view us. I would say probably that there's a few things. One is, the ethnic studies bills that passed out of the House last week. I think it would be good, given that I think Kaya was the one that actually brought that bill forward, and she's not running and others are running forward with that. I think it might be good for the Bennington community to get behind that. I think part of the racial issues we've seen are really, those are kind of spikes in a problem that's underlying in this area. I mean, racism is really at its most insidious in our unconscious bias. So the more we can do to educate young people in our community and change minds, the more we can make, I don't want to call it ignorance, but the level of people not being understanding kind of go away to some degree. So I would like to see us get behind that. I think that if you went up to Montpelier, you'd hear the same thing, that Bennington needs to invest in Bennington. I think that a unique project, the Putnam block, is an interesting example that can go a long way, because now you have really the three biggest employers working together to try to do something. And also you have private citizens getting involved too. So I see that as being I think the value in that is all of these people working together. I think that project goes probably a long way toward getting some movement downtown and getting a large anchor establishment there. But I think people working together is really the shining star in that. Everybody in Bennington is kind of notorious for fighting over a piece of the pie, and we're supposed to be building a whole store here. We need people everybody baking different pies and doing different things, and I think that this is just a good example of everybody putting into this effort.
I also feel very connected to our legislators and our senators. I feel very well supported. I think they've demonstrated a lot of support. The PFOA crisis comes to mind immediately. I've attended most of the forums that have been held. The ones that I've missed have probably conflicted with our select board meetings. They're always there. They're always advocating for those of us in Bennington. And while that's not a direct connection to the select board, it's something that we are certainly very aware of and feel very much a part of. They have attended meetings on occasion when we need them to. I feel like they're very keyed into what we're doing, and I know them personally, and I don't think it's an issue.
Thank you, Jean.
You're welcome.
Bruce?
I'll just question the underlying basis of the question. I actually don't necessarily think that Bennington has some, I don't think the events that have taken place recently in Bennington have illustrated to any of the legislators necessarily from across the state that somehow that Bennington has a unique problem within itself. I actually would say that if anything, what we've experienced here with the events surrounding Kaya or PFOA have really illustrated the dilemmas of living in Vermont. Vermont has an overwhelmingly white population, and the unconscious bias that is experienced here is experienced across the state. And I think that the legislators who are talking about this, basically through the legislation that you were talking about, Bill, that legislation and other actions show that there is, I think, an across the state understanding of the need. I don't worry also about the local legislators. I do think that there can be, we can explore as many ways as possible to be advocating for the needs of Bennington up in Montpelier and wherever else. And so far as I know, the select board has been able to do that, but can do more. We can do more. I will say that's one of the things that the mayors, I will just repeat, that they were doing when they were in fact advocating up in Montpelier. If we had one, that would happen. But we can still do more. That's all I want to say.
Bruce. John, back to you.
What is your vision of Bennington in order to bring it, to give it a better destination, to bring it into the world of people talking about Bennington as a place to visit or be or work?
I think that one comes to me, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't know. As far as a place to be, I came here almost 30 years ago, and I fulfilled every dream I wanted to fulfill. I mean, I started, I don't know how many businesses. I went to school where I wanted to go. I started out without really any resources, car money, anything, and just did everything I could do. For me, Bennington was like the land of opportunity. And I look around and I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm saying it may be harder today. The world may be harder today, but I would like to do my job to make Bennington a land of opportunity for other people. Bennington was a great place for me throughout, my 20s and 30s and much of my 40s. And I don't know, I just really want to make sure that people can really just shoot the moon and accomplish what they want to set out, no matter how crazy the idea is. I think when Sean Marie mentioned, I think I was told it was impossible to open Pangea, impossible to do hydro in Vermont. I mean, I was told this repeatedly, but somehow I got support, and not just from friends, but I remember at one point in time, Dan Monks wrote a letter in support of Vermont Tissue because the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission had missed 2 of their own deadlines, and suddenly I had a joint memorandum from the Vermont delegation requesting the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to hurry up with my little project. And 6 days later, we had our permit, and that was a huge thing. And I think that I would like to be able to have that Bennington exist for a lot of other people.
So does it go to me now, or does
No.
it go to
Nope.
Jean?
Gee,
Okay.
we're just going to keep.
That was
Unless you want to
good.
go.
Well, no, there was this idea that we were going to sort of bounce back and forth. Go ahead.
Part of my closing statement is talking about my vision, so I'm not going to speak to that in totality now. I'm going to
You're not
save
gonna
some
let
of it.
that out.
I'm not going to let that out. I'm going to keep that in my back pocket for now. But yeah, I'm sure all of us would agree. We want all the same things for Bennington, and I'm sure you all would agree too. But I want good jobs for everyone. I want our kids to all do well and get a great education and prosper and have access to good food and be able to hike the Long Trail and live in great neighborhoods and all of that stuff. I would love to see the arts. I know they're a huge part of this community, and I would like to see that grow by leaps and bounds. I think that really is a key to changing Bennington or improving Bennington and really focusing on that, because our resources in the area of arts is very deep. I wrote down, the last sentence I wrote was, I want Bennington to be resilient and brave and proud. I feel like Bennington has low self-esteem, and I've always felt like we have so much to be proud of, and we need to blow our own horn a little more than we do. That's it.
Sure. For a little over 20 years, I taught students from Bennington and the region, and those students, many came into my class and went through the school system thinking less of themselves, I thought, than they needed to. There was an issue of where they thought they were coming from. And that struck me as odd almost from the beginning, because the time when I told people back where I was that we were moving to Bennington, everybody sort of looked at me with a sense of awe. My gosh, you get to live in Bennington? And I said, yeah. And then when I was thinking we were planning on retirement, I was being asked, well, where are you going to move? And I said, we're not going to move. Why would we move? We're in Bennington. And a strange look of dismay almost went over. I don't think it was about my staying. I think it was really about why would you do that? And what my vision for Bennington is the kind of a place where the students who I taught and the students who are like that they get a chance to express themselves, they get a chance to get themselves ready to go out into the world and fly there, and if they are so inclined to come back, then they can do that, and there will be a place for them. Right now, I'm still not sure that there is that place for them all the time, and that worries me. And one of the reasons why I'm running is, in fact, because I want to make sure there's a place for those students to come back and flourish here.
Good timing, Bruce.
Was that two?
Exactly.
On the button.
Well, I'll continue with that theme because I've worked at the community college for a very long time. And clearly, community development and economic development are the two drivers for this community. We really, I think in order for our families to feel happy and feel like their needs are met and that they have what they need to be successful in Bennington, we really do have to put real focus on both community and economic development. On the community development side, I think it's everything from creating spaces and parks where people can gather together and enjoy each other's company, and I think we're moving toward that in downtown Bennington. It's also making sure that we have recreational activities for young and old and all abilities, and I think bringing the YMCA in to help us evaluate and really see what we can do in this community is an important step in helping us achieve that goal. We've got to look at economic development. We have a real need to develop a middle professional class in Bennington, and that's where we can actually bring in more people and also address some of the problems we have with trailing spouses and with just there only being one middle level position for anyone coming into this community. So I do think the focus on community and economic development is what we should be doing, and I think it will make the difference in us seeing that we've invested in ourselves and therefore believing in ourselves.
John wants to know, and I'll yield my time, he wanted to follow up. Is that all right?
Of course.
I don't think I got an answer. I'm thinking of something that is a vision of accomplishing something different than the other 15,000 towns our size around the country would say. And all of you said exactly what all of them would have said in their town, that we're going to make a pretty town. It's a wonderful town. I'm talking about something specific. Make it a convention town. Make it a sports town. Make it a museum town. Make it an education town. A vision that we could develop, that the world would recognize it, was Bennington.
John has long, and I don't know John that well, but I remember 15, 20 years ago, John talking about wanting Bennington to be a destination town. And here it is again. It's kind of that same question. So I'm not sure where we are in the line. If somebody would like to add to their question. Bruce, you look like you might.
I'll give it why not? I am not convinced, actually, that there can be, for a town in the 21st century, the town the size of Bennington, a single thing that makes it. However, I do think that one of the things that can make that we can develop and make more distinctly Benningtonian, I guess, in that sense, is a sense of community participation. And one of the things that I would like to see, and I'm going to speak out of the voice of a civics teacher, we have a whole lot of people who are not participating in community life. And I think one of the things that would transform this town and bring in others, but would transform it, would be a whole lot more emphasis on ways for people to participate in the community that it is. Whether you talk about, we were talking about on the stairs on the way up, the number of people voting, it doesn't look good. And this is, in a town this size, we are precisely, it seems to me, the right size for participation. And it wouldn't be the only thing that I would want to do, but it would certainly be among the things that I think that could make this size town of Bennington distinctive. I'd like to see much more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea of this being a fun place to be and a vibrant place to be is really important. I worry about being a one-company town. There are a lot of conversations, as I'm sure you know, John, about, if we need to be one thing, what is that one thing we want to be? I mean, we have a number of colleges, even though altogether there are 2,000 students. We still have, 5 colleges in town. We have a lot of arts and culture, and those are pretty distinctive. And we also, I mean, when I moved here, people were like, oh, you're going to the home of Bennington Potters. I mean, we do have institutions here that people recognize. So I think I wouldn't want to be a one thing town, because then that is all you are. But I do think that I think building a more vibrant community allows more people to be involved, and I do think that in the same way you're talking about voting, I think having people engage in their community and see their community as part of the fabric of their lives in a way that I do not think they see it now is really critical to me.
So that's a hard question for me, because I hate having one solution or answer to anything. It's just not fair, John. When I look at it, and I think other people have touched on this, I look at Bennington and I see, we have this amazing health facility here. We have great colleges. I'm most familiar with Bennington, which has a history in and of itself. You could spend the next 2 months looking into just the really accomplished people that came from that school. I think about Vermont Tissue, and here you have the paper drafted there. I mean, the paper they made, they used to draft the first document in human history to outlaw slavery. I mean, there are things in this community that are just unbelievable, and I feel fortunate to live here. I actually do at times just wonder how I got to be so lucky. And I think if I could pick any one thing that I could do, it would be to use my skills to do nothing other than to really strengthen the middle class here, so that everyone here felt as lucky as I did and wanted to live here, just because for them it was as wonderful experience it is for me.
I'm going to stick with the arts. When I think about ways to bring people together, I automatically think of the arts. Several of us in this room, I think, participated in the Community Harmony Sing that was at the UU Hall about a month ago. It was a phenomenal experience, and it brought the community together, and we all it was such a really warm thing to participate in. And I remember a friend of mine had an idea several years ago. It never got any legs, but it's still a great idea, and that was to create a hub of workshops that people could come to from all over and study intensively for a few days, a week in the summer on all kinds of different topics, all having to do with the arts. I think that would be a phenomenal idea. I think of Chautauqua, Lake Chautauqua in New York. That sort of a model, I think, was the goal. we do have so many colleges that are so rich in the arts, all kinds of arts, community art projects. The Community Built Park was not an art project, but it was a community project, and I'll never forget that experience. So I think there's just so many possibilities, but if we did them together in a Vermont way, I think it would really bind us together and make us grateful for each other and for where we live. So for me, if I had to pick one thing, it would be the arts.
I'm actually going to break it up with a policy question. And so, of course, it has to do with my old school board hat, so in the school districts by statute need to go out to bid for any job larger than $15,000. It's Title 16, 559, public bids. It talks about when the cost exceeds $15,000, the school board or supervisor union shall publicly advertise, invite, time's up.
Time is up.
You're done.
Invite 3 bids, and it goes on and on. But do you believe the town should have a bidding policy in terms of awarding large contracts or something over $15,000? And if so, what would you think would be a reasonable amount to go out to bid for? And I don't know where we are on the line.
It might be me.
Jeannie?
I do think we need a policy, and I know that that the select board was given some preliminary information a couple months ago, and a small committee was put together to look at that more. I don't know what the correct amount should be. I mean, 15,000 might be fine, but I do think what we need is both something that's quite predictable so that contractors know what to expect, and something that that feels fair so that individuals have a standard way of knowing when a project is coming due or a project is coming up, and so that they can take part in that. So we absolutely need a policy.
Thank you, Jeannie.
I think we absolutely need a policy. You ask about an amount, and I would say that the amount probably needs to be set based upon the work that people are doing. Obviously, if you're going to send out a bid for an auditor, it's probably going to be less than a large municipal highway project. But I think that transparency and an open bidding process absolutely benefit the taxpayer every time. So I feel very strongly that we should have a policy like that.
I think we do have a policy. I think we were going to look at it, we don't have a policy?
No.
Well, we were given something that we were reviewing, so there was a starting point. Okay, maybe it's not a policy, but there was text that existed to guide, but it was inadequate. So yes, obviously it needs to be relooked at, and for me, it needs to be consistent, and it needs to be followed to the letter each and every time, to be fair. Predictability is just good business practice, and it just becomes a really good habit, and that's what a policy should do. I don't know the amount. I would have to really dig into that and think about it.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Yeah. As you can imagine, coming out of the policy committees at the SVSU and at the CDC, I think policies are absolutely essential, and particularly in this area of open bidding, absolutely. There are a variety of reasons to do this. One is so that everybody understands and that the public will know who's bidding on what. Secondly, so that, in fact, you can access the lowest reasonable bid, therefore saving taxpayer money. Transparency becomes really essential in that. Whether the $15,000 is the right amount, that's the statutory amount for schools. I can say that the $15,000 sometimes raised issues at the CDC because we would have items that would be really only accessible from one person. and you'd still end up having to send out the bid. But I think some easy research, it doesn't take long to find the right amount based on what are we asking for? What are we sending out to bid now? And the vast majority of those things, if they're relative, certainly if they're less than 10,000, they probably don't need to, but anything over 15, I would think, would probably need to be an open bidding process. I am sad that we haven't had that policy and would certainly work toward enact that.
Thank you, Bruce. So I think we've been asking and they've been answering questions for a little over 50 minutes. And if somebody would like to ask a question, the reason I'm asking you to step up to the table is only because the mic is there. Would you like me to bring the mic to you? It's not audible, it's just for the TV. Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Dick Bauer. I've been listening very intently to your presentation, your discussion. A couple of issues, I've not heard the word poverty raised, unless I missed it in any of our discussions. As a community member, I'm very, very concerned about issues of poverty. We talked about our low self-esteem. Well, I think that poverty, the amount of poverty we have in this community adds to that concept of low self-esteem. The other word, and I'd like to know what we're doing about it. I mean, I don't solve it, but you know, how you feel about it and where we should go on it. And the other issue would be the opioid crisis. I don't think I heard that word or words mentioned either. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill?
Are we at me? So 2 questions. To address poverty, I guess I would respond to that kind of circumspectly. I mean, my goal is that I think that we need to have a better middle class, which by that I mean we should have fewer people who are impoverished. I think that Bennington, again, really does this amazing job in its community services. I mean, I would have to refer to a list of all the things, but the church outreach programs, the Food for Fuel, the rec center, whether they're private or public, whatever they are, there's all kinds of community efforts. And I think that that's a really big strength of Bennington. So I would say that as a goal that I would have, that I'm not even sure how I would accomplish yet, I think that the best thing we could do would be to make all of those wonderful resources less vital to certain people's lives. There are people that absolutely rely on those resources, and I'm glad that they're there, but I would be happier if they weren't quite so necessary for so many people. The opioid crisis. It's interesting, I was reading an article 3 or 4 years ago from the Vermont Historical Society that was talking about, they were doing an article talking about the terrible opioid crisis in Montpelier in the early 1800s. And it struck me in looking at everything in Bennington that, you know, the opioid crisis is not new to Vermont. And it's also not going away. And I think that we could learn a lot from looking at how it ebbs and flows. And I think someone earlier mentioned the thing that, if you ask me, would be the most important, I think. Well, let me just see if I can figure this out. I think I would like to see more people able to have jobs that accommodated their needs. And by that I mean a minimum wage, a good livable wage gets you so far. That gets you healthy and that gets you safe and well fed. But it does nothing as far as pride. And I think that we as a community and as individuals together need to be more proud, need to have the ability to be more prideful as far as what we're doing and what we're accomplishing individually and collectively. In my mind, I would just like to see more jobs that provide that. There's other things too. There's a lot of community groups that can do that. But I think it's an awful thing, and I don't know how you fix it permanently. I just think that, and we need to try to do two things. One, we need to try to deal with the fact that the addiction itself is a medical problem. And we also need to do everything we can do to prevent people from experiencing that through education, through different programs, so.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you for asking that question, or those questions. They're very important. When I think of poverty in Bennington, and I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert on it, I believe it's generational poverty, and this has become, unfortunately, just sort of a way of life. I know that there's a huge effort going on in the public school system right now on teaching teachers how to deal with childhood trauma, which I believe can be devastating for children. And when I say trauma, it doesn't need to be anything as big as losing a parent or, a huge event. It can be something pretty minor, but to a child, it's very, very traumatic. And I'm hoping that childhood trauma can lead to lots of things, including becoming addicted to opioids or other substances. I feel like kids that grow up in poverty, they don't see the possibilities that they really can achieve for obvious reasons. It probably seems insurmountable to them. And I've always felt if kids can just be shown the possibilities and have someone mentoring them, that would be could make a huge impact. The opioid crisis, the select board heard, I think it was 2 presentations, one by family members of people who have addiction issues, parents, brothers, sisters, and so forth. And then there was another presentation that was led by Jennifer Fells, who works at the hospital, about this incredible, I should have brought it with me, this approach. I counted, I think there were 12 organizations all focused on the opioid crisis and coming at it from every angle possible, how to solve this problem. And I think, wasn't there an article in the paper, they just passed a law on prescription models? So I hope that all of this work that's being done simultaneously in the schools and on the opioid crisis, we may actually see some improvement. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeannie. Jean.
Well, Dick, as you know, you and I work together at the Greater Bennington Interfaith Community Services, which is really one of the many social service agencies that runs the free clinic, that runs Food and Fuel Fund, that runs the kitchen cupboard. But we also know that those kind of programs really are short-term. They don't solve the problem. So poverty is a huge generational issue here, but it's also an issue where the kinds of jobs that we've created in this community and around the United States really are not the kind of jobs that can be sustained and can sustain life. The pay is too low, and there are no benefits. And that to me is a problem. And it's not a problem that the select board by itself can resolve. We can work at it, and we can work at doing the kind of economic development that would help families in crisis poverty situations. But that's where we have to be part of a larger conversation. Secondly, with regard to the opioid crisis, this is in part, it's sort of a double-edged sword. I know most of the law enforcement officers, we've talked about this over the last number of years. This is not a situation that anybody is we're not going to arrest our way out of this problem. This is not primarily a law enforcement issue. I do like the kind of multivalent, conversational, different organizations coming together to address an issue like drugs in the community in a way that I think is a healthier model for addressing a problem that's this deep. And partly because it's not just about opioids. It's about all of the different uses and abuses of substances that human beings are susceptible to. And there is a culture that at least I know here, but elsewhere, where the use of substances to take away the pain of daily living seems to be there, and we need to begin to address those deeper issues. Now, is that a select board issue? I don't know. Maybe, Dick, but certainly we can do everything we can to try to help that. And even if, well, one of us is not going to get elected, I suspect all four of us would be happy to work on that, no matter whether we're elected or not, because that's a huge issue for this town, and for Vermont, and for the United States. It's just a huge issue, and we need to work on it. They're like this. Sorry, that was way over.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's good, though.
Actually, everybody's gotten 3 minutes so far.
All
so-
right.
Oh, goody.
So that's good. So I'm thinking about what I can add to this conversation, because I think we all have similar takes on this. I do think that education is key to this, and I think helping kids see options, possibilities, experience things that they have that are outside their present existence, so that they can imagine and dream, and also connect with adults in the community who care about helping them do that is really important. I think the schools moving toward trauma-informed approaches is really important because poverty and trauma really are just so prevalent in our community. I think something that I do think building a middle class in this community is really important, and I do think community and economic development are at the center of that. So I do think the Select Board has a very, very definite role in making those kinds of changes. I do think that that's where vision matters. An example, I think, would be what the YMCA has already been able to do. They've been here for two summers running summer camp. In those 2 years, they've tripled the number of kids who are attending those summer camps, and almost all of that expansion has been low-income kids. And some kids have gone to camp for as little as $10 a week. So it's very, I think, just expanding the things that we can do, it becomes really important. Recently, the town and the school and the 3 Bennington schools wrote a 21st Century Grant application for after-school programming for the town schools. There is a real need. We have inadequate after-school programming at present. This would more than double that, and it would also allow before and after care that the YMCA can offer, which is really critical to working parents. You cannot always leave your work at 3:30 to pick up your kids. It would also allow us to do things like vacation and snow care, snow day care. I mean, I think if we want our community to change, we've got to build that infrastructure, and that really does come from supporting our community development more robustly, and then looking at what our needs are in economic development. So on the opioid crisis, it's a chronic disease. We have got to, I think it's part and parcel of what we're seeing in terms of poverty. It doesn't always come from poverty, but I think some of the same issues need to be tackled there that we're seeing with poverty. And I'll stop.
Thank you for those 2 questions. Is
were
there
excellent.
another question from the audience? Joel? Don't give them a double whammy,
We're taking notes.
Just a single whammy.
just a single whammy.
So I'd like to ask a question about bias and conflict of interest. And I think these are they're hard terms to pin down, hard terms to define. So I'd like to, if you'll allow me, make each of you feel a little uncomfortable. I've come up with 4 illusions or appearances of conflicts of interest or areas of bias that the four of you may confront at some point if on the select board. So I think you'll see, I'll go through the four of you, if you could address, not necessarily, this isn't a defense or an accusation of anything, but more how you look at conflict of interest through this lens. So for Jean Connor,
So wait a second, are you going to be, I just want to be clear, you're going to give specific scenarios to each one of these four people versus one scenario and they'll all react?
yeah, because I think it's something that is relevant to each of them.
Okay, so who are we at?
Yeah.
Whose question is up?
Remember? Do you remember?
It's Bill's turn.
No.
No?
No, I think so. I think it's
spoke
G.
last.
I think it's
Oh, goody.
So at a recent select board meeting, when there was a presentation about marketing, you made a comment offering, I don't know if it was volunteer or paid, that a member of your family might be able to help out in the context of town marketing and writing copy for town marketing. Can you address that, how that might give the illusion or appearance of conflict?
I believe
of
I
interest?
said she would voluntarily do that. So it would be for no pay.
So is that all that you have to say about conflict of interest?
You gave me a specific scenario. I think I answered your specific scenario to me. So that was my daughter, who is a freelance writer, but it would have been a voluntary task if they chose to ask if they needed a writer.
Thank you.
So monetary compensation is a huge part of conflict of interest.
It can be, certainly,
Yes.
yeah.
So that's all I have to say.
Okay.
So I'm going to put a time, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, I'm going to put a timer on you too.
Great.
what's mine.
Bruce, I believe you sit on the board of the Bennington Interfaith Community Service. You don't
Not
anymore?
anymore. I resigned, 2 years ago now?
Wow,
Yeah.
out-of-date website.
I was there for the first 6.
I was there for the first 6 as president and the next 6 as board member or something like that. But in any
I mean, in any event, or any
Let's say
other
there's
board,
something that's-
or any other board that you may sit on.
Sure.
If those boards were to come before the select board, if you were elected,
Sure.
how would you handle that through the lens of conflict of interest?
I actually helped the supervisory union work their way through conflict of interest law. I'm a pretty strong stickler on this kind of thing, and my standard is the appearance standard. So if an ordinary person might think that I have a conflict of interest, this may not be the legal standard for select boards, this is my standard. If the ordinary person might doubt whether or not I am acting to somehow benefit myself, then I should be recused. I don't think my participation in a board is so important that appearance of a conflict of interest shouldn't knock me off for that conversation or that vote or whatever that is, and for that discussion. And I would recuse myself from having any private one-on-one conversations with board members as well.
Thank you. Jean Jenkins. There was an issue recently on the select board where an organization, a nonprofit organization, came before the select board. You recused yourself. They were asked to come back and provide further information, and you unrecused yourself. And you sit on the board of what's been called a competing organization. How would you deal with that under the lens of conflict of interest?
I'm not exactly, well, I mean, I understand generally what you're asking me, which is about the Bennington Downtown Association Alliance, but I'm not sure about the recusing self and then coming back later and not. I agree with Bruce that generally when the Bennington Downtown Alliance, because I am on that board and I'm past president, generally when they have come before the select board, I go sit in the seat, in the audience. I even sat in the audience when John sat with the marketing group, with the marketing task force. I think conflict of interest is something I care about a lot. I do think appearance matters. I will say that most of the time when I go sit in the audience, people are in the audience are saying, you don't need to come sit in the audience. And I'm like, for myself, I feel like I need to. So I feel like one of the things, because I'm never really sure about when it feels like there's an appearance, I always ask other members of the board. I always say, I feel like, I want to make sure I'm feeling like I should sit in the audience, I should not sit in the audience. I ask for other people's opinion as well as my own. So I do think it's very serious, and I feel like I have been extremely careful in that, and I will continue to be very careful about conflict of interest.
Thank you.
Okay, Bill's turn.
Bill, there were stories earlier this year about the damage to the hydro plant, and now you're running for select board. I could see how potentially down the line there may be a matter that could come before the select board that would somehow deal with this. How would you look at that through the lens of conflict of interest or bias?
Well, obviously that informs my decisions to some degree because it's an experience that I've had, but I actually think it's an asset. And as far as conflict of interest, I actually would have been conflicted long before any drills showed up because I had contracts with the town dating back to 2013, 12, 11, something like that are power purchase agreements between Carbon Zero and the town. So I would have already been conflicted on that project. And having been conflicted while on the North Bennington board, I would have just recused myself as I had done before. But thank you for asking.
Absolutely. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Plural. Nancy, did you have your hand up?
Hi, my name is April Dunham. So I hear the same sentiment over and over again about really strengthening the middle class. Me and my husband I've lived here my whole life. My husband's actually from Rutland. So we have a young family. We're really involved as much as we can in the community. And there's some really great programs out there for kids that we try to take, apart as many as we can. My concern is if we also been long-term members of the rec center. And I'm not opposed to change if it's within reason. But looking at similar rates, I looked at North Adams YMCA, which I figured is pretty, economically similar to ours. Right now we pay like $140 a year, which is ridiculous. It's a steal, to go to the rec center. But with the rates of the YMCA going up, we're looking at almost $800 a year for a family. And we do a lot of other activities. So in order to fit that, and we'd have to take another activity out to do that. The grants really aren't there for middle class. So essentially it's eliminated some from our family. Just wondering, in regards to YMCA, and in general, what we're doing to help keep these things affordable so working families like me can still afford to do these things with our children.
Sure. Okay. It's me.
Great question.
Yeah. I am not opposed at all to utilizing the skills and talents of organizations to assess program, maybe even to add to our current program. So that's where I think currently the contract, that's essentially what we're talking about, that they are doing an assessment, perhaps adding some programs, but I will have to be strongly convinced that it's in the town's best interest to enter into some kind of longer-term contract with that current Y. Certainly, I would never enter into one that that changes the fee schedule so dramatically that members of the town who can utilize those resources now can't. To me, the rec center and the senior center and the parks are in fact town assets. And they need to be managed, in my view, they need to be, at least by default, managed by the town. That's what we have a town manager for. I would need to be strongly convinced that that's not the model that we would use before I could ever vote for the rec center working under, just being contracted out to a different manager and change that whole fee schedule, if you get it. Okay. Ooh, I beat two.
Jeannie,
Hi.
Jean, which way? This way? That way?
I think we
We keep going this way. We're going this way.
We're not doing, this is too hard. So I appreciate your question. So again, the town would continue to own the assets, which I think are really important. And I think we're all concerned about fee schedule. We're not going to enter into anything that's not going to work for the community. The reason to bring the Y in is to figure out how we can build efficiencies, how we can start looking at our recreational opportunities as a whole rather than parceling them out into seniors and everybody else, and to also look at where we can build efficiencies. And we know that we've already built efficiencies in the system just in terms of the way the management structure is working this year. This is a one-year trial, and we just had a meeting with GBIGS earlier this week. Can it be earlier? Late last week, and talking about exactly this sort of thing. So what happens? How do we make sure that we keep this affordable? So the town, anything that happens with the rec center, the town has to be heavily involved. We have to make sure that the fee structure is going to work for our community. And in looking at what North Adams already does, my understanding is that that's their top rate, but that is not really the rate that the community pays. I think for us, we would want to see it look different even on paper. I don't want to see something that says it's going to be $800 for a family and then say, but don't worry, because it's only going to be $150.
Yeah.
Really.
Because their grant system,
Yeah.
honestly, if you look at the grant after 27,000, there's no grants after
Yeah.
that. So you'd be paying full price according to what I'm looking at.
So, so this is a one-year period to look at what we have, what kinds of advice we can get from the Y, hopefully some new programming. At the end of the year, we should end up in better shape than we are right now. And then we'll look at this. Okay.
So I grew up going to a Y all the time, and I remember it fondly. That said, I use the rec center here, and I like it, and I would like to see it intact and remain affordable. I think that if I am on the select board, I think I would want to keep a close eye on making sure that not just that the fees stay the same, but that the services that are provided don't diminish. Perhaps some things go away and new things are added, but that the net to the public has the same value and value to what what people in Bennington are looking for as well. So I would say that if I win, I would be happy to hear your opinion and other people's opinions on where we land at the end of this year, because I don't think I'm going to exclusively be able to get a good capture on what the performance of the YMCA is at that facility.
Okay, thank you.
I've heard that concern about the rates going up from many people. So don't feel like you're alone and don't feel like you're not being heard, because you are. To me, it's extremely important. It's probably the most important issue for me if the affiliation is going to work or not. I had one person speak to me who's has been working in the not-for-profit world in community development his entire career, just recently retired, and I said, well, what about if there was scholarship money available? And he said, they won't fill out the forms. People that need assistance, it's embarrassing, and they won't fill out the forms, even though that would benefit them. So I believe him, I trust his opinion, and it's, like I said, it's a huge issue for me. I just wanted you to know that there's a committee that's being formed, a mixture of people, some of which are community members, some of which are going to be people who use the rec center. So be rest assured that there are going to be people paying attention to how this year progresses and make suggestions and highlight things that aren't working. I don't expect the programming to remain the same. I expect it to be better.
Yeah.
If it's the same, it's kind of pointless. I mean, I'm expecting there to be more programming for seniors, more programming for families, more programming for everyone. I think that's the goal, and I really encourage you to stay involved because you're exactly the kind of person they need to hear from.
Now, my question of the committee, is there a public forum on that one?
There are going to be public forums that are going to be reporting out, yes.
There would have to be.
Yes.
And there's also a quarterly reporting requirement by the Y. So in April, the YMCA should be coming back with their first quarter report.
So you should give your phone number
Yes.
to one of these people.
Yes.
So that they contact you to possibly be on the committee.
Yes,
That'd be great.
please.
And my
Always looking
follow-up
for
question quickly, is this something, if the Y ever was to take over, will we vote on it as a town, or would it just be the select board voting again?
I think it's the select board. It's the select board. But you'll have many opportunities to give feedback.
Okay, thank you.
Audience? Hello there.
I guess what I would like to talk about is transparency and accountability of the select board. I think they have done, I'd like to know how they're going to improve that with the town manager and the assistant town manager with his mismanagement. And also, I'm really disappointed with the select board and their sellout to the community and allowing billionaires to put solar collectors in our town and pretty much destroying, or will be destroying, some of our million-dollar views and views up on Blueberry Hill. And my good friend who has worked very, very hard over the years to try to prevent that. I'd like to know what you're going to do to hopefully not allow that, or to maybe prevent that from happening and holding our town administration accountable. Thank you.
Did I just go on the rec center?
I think Jeannie did.
Or did she? Did you go on the rec? No, you were at the end. You were at the end of the rec center.
April, who started that?
Was it Bruce? Me? Okay. So it's you.
Okay, thank you.
So it is you.
All right, lovely. Transparency and accountability. It is really important. And, the role of the select board, as I see it, is really to provide the vision and the policy for what we want to do to make sure that the town plan reflects what this community sees as important and the way we want to go forward. And then the town manager and the administration really carrying out those values, those policies, that vision. So, that's a structure that I want to see, and that's a structure that I think, and that I certainly support and encourage. I think in our town plan, we have certainly tried to address what we know is coming down the pike, and one of those things is certainly we support renewable energy. What can we do to make sure that solar developers that come into our community, that we do everything we can to make sure that we have the upper hand and that we can call the shots. As we know, there are limitations to what we can do, and that doesn't mean that we aren't trying hard to make sure that we put things in place to support the community as best we can. I think I do appreciate that at every meeting there is public comment, and that is a time when citizens can come before us and say, here's what's not working, here's what you need to be thinking about, here are ways I think that things should change. I think that is a strength of this community, and I think it's something that serves us well.
I'm going to answer the first part a little quickly so I can knock your socks off with the second part. So I think we've talked about open bids. I think open bids are a big part of getting to transparency. And again, I'll say that, you know, the vision and the leadership come from the select board, and the town manager and the assistant town manager really serve at the pleasure of the select board. So problems with the town manager should really be addressed through the select board, I think. I mean, it's fine, obviously, to talk to Stu. He talks to people and gets back to them and what have you. But I think ultimately the select board becomes accountable to some degree for who they have in that position and what they're doing. Moving on to solar. I spent about a year writing about this very subject last year. And here's what I can tell you. And I wasn't in the room. Other people were in the room. I'm not sure if you two were. But I would have taken an entirely different approach. Putting in, and I speak only to utility scale solar, so I'm talking about the 2.2 megawatt projects. Speaking only to those and installing them above the 42nd parallel, you only get a certain amount of sun. But solar utility scale projects do something really, really helpful for the energy grid. Between approximately 11 and 2 every day, the energy spikes. And you, as far as renewable solutions, solar's it. And in order to offset that spike, typically what happens is you fire up a fossil fuel plant, almost always, or sometimes you'll use a non-renewable source of hydro. So solar is incredibly good at affecting what's called peaking and getting us off of fossil fuels. However, January 28th, 2017, the Department of Public Service issued a report that stated very simply that most peaking in Vermont was now happening after sundown. March 1st, 2018, I don't know how I remember this stuff. The Vermont Department of Public Service issued a report saying that now peaking all months out of the year is happening after sundown in Vermont, which you have to figure is a monumental accomplishment. But on the flip side now, above the 42nd parallel, where you're getting half as much power out of the same panel that you would have in Arizona while you're in Vermont, your costs are much higher. So when you install these massive projects, you have two primary results. Number one, this is all about keeping the 1% incredibly wealthy, because whoever puts that in and spends the $6 million to do that project is going to make $1.5 million in year one. They're going to make almost 40% back in the first year of operation. Number two, you're going to have now an incredibly expensive option for your energy, which is going to serve to drive up rates for the ratepayers, period, long term. The actual result is that you make one person a ton of money and it costs everybody else for a very long time a lot of money. That's the result, which is why you'll find the day they canceled this last forum, I actually had time to catch up on my Public Utility Commission readings because clearly I have a problem. And I think it was the second time the Public Utility Commission actually rejected a certificate of public good, finding that it is not in the public good because it will serve to drive up rates, because there was already plentiful renewable supplies. Actually, I think in hydro and in wind. I think it was the Derby solar project. It also had to do with distribution, but primarily it's going to drive up the rates, and that was the second one they'd done that for. You want to prevent the solar projects, you prevent it from getting a certificate of public good by proving that it's simply not in the public good to put them in. That's aside from citing and all the other issues you can throw at it. It's just going to serve to drive up your rates, and there's no more benefit that you can yield off of that project or that the public can. So.
Okay. My turn. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to top that.
Would you like Bill's research paper?
No, thank you.
Yes, if you want.
No, thank you. My comments will be very brief and very simple. Transparency, to me personally, is huge. I was involved in a successful lawsuit against a local entity that addressed the open meeting law a few years ago. That the open meeting law was not being followed, so I'm very sensitive to the open meeting law, which translates to transparency. Jeannie referenced earlier our 2-meeting before we vote rule, I think has been really beneficial and also promotes transparency. I believe our executive sessions are spot on. We never have gone into an executive session, an illegal executive session. We don't even congregate in the same room with more than 3 people, because that could constitute an executive session or be perceived as such. And we don't monkey around with the agenda. What's on the agenda is what our meetings will cover. I've seen where things get added to the agenda at the last moment, and that's something that doesn't happen. As far as the solar siting, I guess the only thing I'm going to say is when you're sitting on this side of the table having to make these decisions, it's very, very different than sitting on that side of the table. We have to make decisions through a very different lens than people who are going to be directly affected by the siting of a solar array. And I guess that was probably, it was a very, very difficult time, and it was one of the decisions that I had to participate in that we agonized over many, many, many hours publicly and privately. And I guess I would just say that we did not take that decision and those decisions lightly. I think all of us, like I said, agonize and probably lose sleep over those decisions, but ultimately, we're the select board. We can't advocate for small pockets of the community. We have to think about the community in its entirety when we make our decisions. Thank you.
One of the things that I've noticed when I've been participating or sitting in there is that select board meetings are sometimes, it's a difficult process to follow. And if you're like me and you want to know how things work, it's not readily transparent as to what the select board is doing, at least a chunk of the time. And one of the concerns I have about transparency isn't just the policy-making process, although it's hard to know where the select board keeps its policies because they're not easily findable. But the accountability process, it's that, I would agree in theory with everything that Jeannie said, absolutely. The problem is in practice. I don't see it working in practice. And I'm interested in the practice of it. I'd like us to have a completely open process and that the two employees, the town manager and the assistant town manager and all the rest of the employees who work for them, really, I would like it so that everybody felt like they were getting their direction from the select board. That is not how it is perceived, at least with the people I've been talking to. And that, it seems to me, is one of the problems. It's part of the problem with the outcome, at least the current outcome, in the placing of the solar up on the hill. You know, I would have loved to have heard that explanation about 8 or 10 months ago, but I'm not convinced that even if I had heard that explanation, that would have gotten, you know, we would have gotten much of a hearing. That's what I'm worried about. So I would say transparency is really important in practice, and accountability in practice, not just in theory.
Lynn? So it is 8:35, and so Lynn, ask your question.
You can give 30-second answers.
Sure.
Oh, I'm tall.
Yes, we'll shorten them to 1 minute.
Okay. In elections, it's often just par for the course to talk about all the issues and all the things we're going to come in and change and all the things that are broken with the system. And I think some of you are even running on change. So what, if anything, do you see that the town is doing right, that are positive things that are happening in the town? I'm just curious what your thoughts on that. It can be one thing, 3 things, whatever you think.
Where are we?
Bill. We're at Bill.
Me, I get to go first. I don't have any time to think. There's a lot that this town does right. I mean, I think that the town's working toward the Putnam project and helping facilitate that is a really good step. That's a good big step. I think that there's a lot of little things. I think generally the municipal buildings are in good shape. I think we have a good police force. I'm not going to say that they're perfect, but I think we have a decent police force. I think they're comprised of good people. I think that, I don't know. I think that, again, the town does a lot well. Our fire services are obviously ample. I'm not worried about that. I don't know, our community, I mean, the rec center, that's another one. I mean, there's a whole lot. There's so much that we do well. It's actually hard for me to decipher what's town and what's state and what's, you know, the museum, all of that. So I think there's a lot of really great things here.
Jean?
Grow Bennington's pretty cool. I think the two parks that are in the middle of being constructed right now, I think everything's kind of stalled now for the winter, but I think they're going to add a lot of interest to the landscape downtown, and I think it's just very uplifting. I'm also extremely excited about the initiative that Sarah Perrin and Betsy Greenawalt, the food truck, those things are just fun. I'm into having fun. The rec center, I think, could be transformative for the community. I love the fact that we've done the citizen surveys 2 years in a row. I think that's a really good tool. Maybe painting with a bit of a broad brush, but I think it's really valuable information. And I don't think that's something that's been done before. I think that's something new. I'm incredibly proud of our two libraries and the initiatives that they're taking and the program that they provide us. Those are the things that come to mind. And obviously the Putnam project is huge. Yeah.
I actually, let me just, I agree with most of what everybody here has said. The number of people involved in voluntary associations of a variety of sorts, I think Bennington does well. I think we can do better, but I think I'm always amazed at the number of people who volunteer. I think we have a wonderful and I would hope expanding group of local merchants and folks who are involved in businesses, downtown for sure, but elsewhere as well. I think, when I think of what's happening or where I can go, I don't have a problem finding things to buy for my friends and family by buying local. And let me put in a plug for my old employer, the schools. I actually think teachers are doing really an amazing job in lots of places. And I'll put a particular plug in for the CDC. I think it's the unsung hero of education. So I'll just do that because I think it's right.
Jeannie?
Oh, I think there's so many lovely things that are happening, and I think that I do think the select board has been behind a lot of those actions. I think both on the community, there went my tea, both on the community and economic development fronts, it's really important. I think passing the TIF district is really important, setting the stage for infrastructure for redevelopment downtown. I think the YMCA has transformative possibilities. I think the charter review was a really important step that we took in this community. And the 1% options tax, again, could be really important if we want to exercise that. Putnam is going to be huge. And I think, we are a community that really works well together, and we do want to see change. And I feel like we're poised for a lot of things to happen. The parks, Putnam, all these things are in the spring are just going to blossom. And so, I do think we are in a really good place to make positive change right now. So I'm looking forward to it. Thank you for asking.
Is there one last burning question out there? Nancy?
I had two quick questions and a comment. The first question is, do the candidates feel it's a conflict of interest for a high-ranking town official to sit on a local school board? The second is, how much input do you think residents should have in Bennington before we see bike paths start showing up all over town, losing public parking that's been here for 100 years? I've made myself clear over the last couple of years why I want to see the mayor get into the charter. Transparency and accountability has not been presented at select board meetings. To hear tonight that we don't have a policy in place for bidding and going out to bid, I can't understand that. I was shocked that it took the charter committee to discover this town didn't have a policy for purchasing and bidding. You discovered that a year and a half or 2 years ago.
A year and a half ago.
Longer than that?
A year and a half, maybe.
For 20 years, citizens have come before this board raising concerns about how this town has awarded bids. And to find out tonight that in a year and a half, the select board has not put a policy in place for how the town puts out bids, just another reason why people need to vote and get the mayor into the charter.
Thank you, Nancy. So that was 2 questions there, and the second
I'm
one.
not sure I understand.
Yeah, I don't.
The second.
Can we
But I'm
identify
just-
the questions?
Yeah, I just want, the question seemed like that it seemed like you were asking if bike paths were going to appear without votes or without discussion.
I asked last summer at a select board meeting where bike paths were being planned for Bennington. A couple of people were concerned they were going to lose the parking in front of their house for bike paths, so I asked. I was told twice that there weren't any bike paths planned. Then I went to the BCRC website. There are bike paths planned for Benmont Avenue. The town is currently out for bid for bike paths on Kosher Drive. There are several bike paths planned on the BCRC website, and yet no one felt that they needed to be upfront honest with me to tell me that at the meeting. Now, if our local officials can't be honest about where they're putting bike paths.
Okay, it sounds like a bigger question. I mean, it seems like you.
Well, I just want to know, are citizens going to be able to find out ahead of time where these bike paths are planned and say, no, we don't want to lose the parking in front of our home or the parking at the high school, by the fence, by the football field, by the veterans' home? I just don't want to see these plans dropped on us like we've seen many plans over the last several years where we have no say.
Okay. I think, do you understand the questions now?
Yeah, I don't believe I can answer them, though.
Well, there are a lot of plans on the BCRC website that should have been shared with the citizens.
Yeah, okay.
Bruce, go ahead.
Okay.
I'm just picking.
On the first question, is it a conflict of interest for a high-ranking town official to sit on a school board? I think the answer is positions don't necessarily make a conflict of interest. Conflict of interest arises out of particular issues. So a person's employment, at least here in Vermont, a person's employment does not disqualify them for running for almost any office. Now, we all may disagree with that. I may have qualms about that, but I think that's what I just said is true. But so if there were conflicts of interest, they would arise under issues, and those issues would create an appearance, and they would have to recuse themselves under the appearance standard that is the policy of the SVSU. With that. As for bike paths and other issues of that sort, that's precisely the point was trying to make earlier. And that is, it's not enough to say we have transparency because we set out the policy or the vision and then the employees run with it. It is precisely these kinds of actual practices so that a bike path isn't all of a sudden appearing along the side of a road when nobody in Bennington necessarily, other than, well, it's not even clear to me whether the select board members were involved in that. So particularly if it's taking away public parking or, issues like that are of natural interest to the community, that needs to come before the community. And I would have thought that under Tom's two-meeting rule, that's precisely what should happen, and nobody can then you've got your chance. But you actually have to know that it's happening, and you have to know what the plans are. And so that's what I would be working for, Nancy.
Okay. Good
there
job.
it goes.
Okay, all right. So I agree with you on the conflict of interest. I think just as in any situation where someone is wearing multiple hats, they need to be paying attention to what their financial or personal gain is, whether they do have a conflict. And, so, in this case, I think that individual has to be paying attention to that. And I happen to know he has, because I've been at some school board meetings where he has had to recuse himself. In terms of the bike path, I think what you're referring to is BCRC has a transportation planner, and part of what they do is look at what the needs of the community are, and particularly on the two roads that you referenced, Kosher Drive and Benmont Avenue. As you know, those are both really dangerous places to walk or to bike. And so I believe what you're referring to is a planning document that says if we were to put bike lanes or sidewalks or walking spaces anywhere, here's what that would look like.
Well, the bids are on the town website right now for Kosher Drive, and I don't know if they've come before a select board meeting to explain what's going to happen.
We had a presentation, a public presentation on bike and hiking paths. I'm trying to think, maybe 6 months ago. So it looked at Benmont, it looked at the whole town, and it looked at off-road, so it looked at everything from the Ninja Path to paths along roads. And it was a comprehensive transportation plan to make sure that people could get from their home to employment on Northside Drive, if that's particularly, or kids walking home from the middle school or the high school needing to cross Kosher Drive to get to their home. So there was quite a public presentation for that, which...
And if I remember correctly, it was all driven, a lot of it was safety, safe places for people to get from one place to the other. I think that was one of the driving forces of those plans.
I think I heard about that.
On the conflict, I would actually just tend to say, I agree with what's been said, and I think it would be a case by case. I mean, you're really talking about an employee of one financial body being an elected official of another, and I think you just have to look at the specifics of any given case and make sure that that there's no personal gain, or that you're not acting inappropriately. And I think I actually wouldn't know necessarily I don't know the inner workings well enough of that board, so I can't speak to what that might encompass. And I would have to rely on that person and the rest of the people on that board to act responsibly in that case. On the bike paths, I'm an avid biker, so I would be a beneficiary of this, but I do think that public input on these things is vital. It sounds like there may have been some kind of public presentation, and I do think that would be necessary. It's essentially you're kind of looking at a change of use for a portion of a road, which I think everybody talking about that would benefit the project generally.
I'd just like to add one thing on the conflict of interest. As far as school board, select board, there really isn't a lot of...
Go ahead.
Okay, there really isn't a lot of crossover, but there were some instances where, let's say, the school district was going to be negotiating a possible agreement with, and that obviously was a time where there had to be a refusal, and there was. But they really are functioning in very different spaces.
I guess it's the appearance, where a town official will talk about projects and programs for the youth of the community, put on a different hat as a select board member, and vote against everybody else what happened last year with Jerry.
No one here is on the select.
So Nancy, what I'm going to ask is that you continue this conversation with any of the select board members, and what I'm also going to say is that you could, or a body of citizens could recommend a charter change in that there is in the town charter that the town manager shall not be involved in any, basically an elected position. No, I know. What I'm saying is that it is specifically to that person, and if you would like to see a change in that, you might think about bringing forward a proposal to add any person that citizens felt should also not be in an elected position. But what I'd like to do with the 12 minutes remaining is make sure that each of the candidates gets their 3 minutes to close, because we're at almost at the 2-hour mark and not at the 90-minute mark. So Nancy, I didn't mean to cut you off. Did you have a question about the senior center? Well, how about we have them give their statements, and then they can take another question. How's that work? So I don't care who starts. Were you prepared?
Always prepared, Jean Marie.
You
Yes, I'm
started.
prepared.
Would you like to start again?
Go.
Happy to be last.
Okay, Bruce.
Okay. First, I want to thank the other candidates. I want to thank the organizers and all of you and whoever's watching out there for your presence here. I'm also thankful for the folks who are running, their willingness to serve the public good tonight by hosting this event, by coming here and trying to answer questions. If you were to vote for me in for a position on the select board, this is what I think you will get. Someone who will work with other members of the select board and with you, the public, for greater openness, accountability, and transparency in the town government, so that you as citizens will know not only what is happening in town government, but why those actions were chosen. And that you may have input into that process. Communication with the whole Bennington community, it seems to me, is extremely important. It's important in any democracy. You will also get a board member who will do all that he can to increase the number of job opportunities for people in Bennington, particularly those kind of jobs which can support individuals and families with real incomes. Support the activities of the town and the assets of town government. A select board member who will approach every issue with a sense of professionalism, that does not treat any citizen of Bennington as unworthy of being heard. Someone who will seek to preserve and enhance all of the assets of this beautiful town, including the parks and the rec center and all the other facilities that are here and that are being developed, as well as the water resources that are around us, the water in our aquifer, which is an incredible resource to us, and the full development of a vibrant downtown and retail district. Someone who honors and encourages the countless members of our community who volunteer their time and talents in many nonprofits and other organizations that make this town a great place to live. And finally, someone who will work toward developing a proactive approach to governing so that we are not always only reacting to events, but rather planning for growth and making policy for growth. I believe that I have those talents and gifts that can help move this town forward, assist developing all of these assets, including its downtown. My education and experience have taught me how to work across political and social divides, how to process and develop policies and procedures that will assist the town in addressing these issues. It is my hope that we can, together as a newly formed select board, make this town much more of what it can be. And so I encourage everybody to go out and vote on March 5th. And if you haven't registered, you can still register right up to March 5th. So please do. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. Jeannie.
Okey doke. All right, so thank you again for being here, whether you're here in person or virtually. So, as far as I know, I am the first person in my family ever to run for public office. This is my third position in the public realm. My first time as a public servant was in third grade when I was elected to secretary of the lower council of my elementary school. My only clear memory of my tenure there was that one of my duties each week was to stand on the stage at the assembly for the 1st to 3rd graders and read the names of students who had broken the rules. One week, during the end of my year, I had to read my own name at the assembly because I had failed to wait for the crosswalk guard before crossing in front of the school. It was mortifying. At 8 years old, this served as my somewhat rude awakening to the world of politics. And apparently, it took me another 25 years to recover from that character-building moment. Soon, and I did so when I moved to Bennington. So soon after I moved to Bennington, I served on the BSD board. And then just 3 years ago, Jean Connor and I ran successfully for the select board. I'm proud of my time on the select board. The board is proactive and thoughtful and willing to face issues head-on. We've not passed them on to future boards, and we've tried to deal with the issues that weren't taken care of in the past. When I think about what I want to share with you about my first term on the board, there is a rush of things I'd like to talk about, but there is not enough time. So my top 5 are, first, completing the substantial charter review, including the 1% tax option, local tax option, clarifying the role of the select board, and also increasing oversight of the manager. A focus on economic development in this community, including everything from establishing the TIF district, to supporting the Putnam development, to encouraging interesting reuses of old buildings in town, and welcoming new businesses into the downtown. Remaining focused on the PFOA crisis and the solutions. Increasing the profile of community development in this community. And finally, I think inviting a range of organizations to the select board meetings to inform the board and the community on topics including housing, poverty, drug crisis, status of bike and hiking trails, and community health initiatives. We have incredible assets in Bennington, and I believe all the work done in the past few years have moved the town forward. I believe that I am effective at the work you've elected me to do, and I ask for your vote for me, Jeannie Jenkins, and also for Jean Connor on March 5th. Thank you.
Wow. Good time.
So, first off, I think this is a neat election because I think we have 4 qualified people. I'd like to count myself among them. So this is really going to be an election where Bennington will land in good hands, I'm sure. This is more about ideals than it is about competency, I think. And I'd like to thank everybody who's watching and everybody who's here for taking the time to get to know a little bit more about us. I also want to take this opportunity to plug the 2020 census, because if you want to be we need to be represented properly in the 2020 census in order to get access to a lot of resources that we need. Keep in mind you can access early voting, and of course please show up and vote, because that's what really matters. The decisions on who wins are going to be made by the people who show up. So I think in long term, I think my skills and my work ethic have served me well professionally. I'm in a position where I would like to actually serve the community and try to build the Bennington that I experienced for everybody, because it is a great Bennington. I think that most importantly, I personally would like to really look at our infrastructure and look at how the town became this. And I mean, Bennington really has an amazing history that it's hard to find anywhere else. And if you look around, all those resources are still here. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We've got a bunch of great wheels. We just need to make the decision to put the wheels on the wagon. And I think in my mind, that's what I want to get to work on. So anyway, I'd like to ask you to vote for me, Bill Scully, on March 5th. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Jean?
I'll be the 4th person to thank everyone for organizing this, and thank you for coming, and thank you out there for watching. I'm often asked, as maybe you are, I'm not sure, if it's fun to serve on the select board. I don't think fun is the right word, but it's always interesting and it's very fulfilling. Strangely enough, I actually enjoy the meetings and have only missed one in 3 years. I enjoy learning how municipalities run and have come to realize it's complicated. I want Bennington to be a thriving community with a vibrant downtown, With good-paying jobs for all, I want a community where all of our kids are successful learners and reach their potential. I want our citizens to be safe and our roads, sidewalks, and bridges in the best shape. I want to see people suffering from addiction get the help they need to be able to move forward with their lives. I want Bennington to be a compassionate and welcoming place for all people. I could go on, but you get the picture. If I had a magic wand, I would make it so, but I'm not a wizard, so I choose to want to serve on the select board instead. And continue to work to move Bennington in a positive direction. I see nothing but potential in front of us. I'd like to speak just for a moment on the budgeting process, since we just came off of that about a month ago. While the budgeting process is not the most enjoyable part of being on the select board, it's critically important and deserves a lot of time and effort to get it right. And the select board spent at least 10 hours, estimating that, in public meetings and countless hours individually in our homes reading and analyzing and preparing for the meetings. I believe we did an amazing job by pushing back where we could to come up with some creative solutions to meet the needs of the town. None of us on the select board wants our taxes to go up. But the reality is costs, many of them are fixed, go up each year, and we must take care of our infrastructure, our equipment, our buildings, and pay our town employees what they deserve. Our libraries are extremely important, and we were not willing to put the safety of our citizens at risk. This year's budget does all of that with as small an increase as possible. I bring this up because I'm very proud of the process and participation of the select board during budget season this year, and we truly, truly had the taxpayers on our minds every single step of the way. In closing, I feel I have earned your vote based on my proven record of giving attention to the issues, my level of commitment, and my ability to listen. I am ethical and a stickler for doing things right. I hold myself to a very high standard, and I take the responsibility of serving on the select board very seriously and give every vote I cast a lot of thought and consideration. The board has made some tough decisions over these last 3 years that were not always popular, but I guarantee they were made after much deliberation and analysis of the issue from all angles. I don't have a personal agenda for wanting to be on the select board other than a desire to serve. I believe that is critical as a select board member. I don't pretend to know everything, but I am always willing to listen and learn and ask questions. And I, too, hope I can count on your vote on March 5th. And I hope you will also vote for Jeannie Jenkins as well. We are great genes for Bennington.
Thank you all. Would you like to ask your one question, and then I will make my...
I just had a question. They say they do so much, and they're willing to help everybody, and especially the seniors. I'd like to know if they've done anything, what it was. Because basically, they don't do much.
Mike, did you pick that up? So what was just asked is what the the candidates or the select board has done for the seniors in Bennington.
I don't know if the two gentlemen can speak to that. I don't know if that's, maybe we should talk to Rose offline. I mean, if you want to take a stab at it, you weren't on the select board, so.
So Rose, you and I have had this conversation. We've talked about the senior center a lot. The senior center really matters to this community. It serves not only Bennington, but it serves the surrounding community. And the people that come into the senior center are often coming in to buy groceries or to do other things in this community as well. What I have really pushed for is not having a siloed senior center and then the rest of the recreation opportunities in this community, but really to connect all of those recreational opportunities so that seniors will get more and they will get high-quality programming. You know, we've talked about the fact that we've needed to worry about staffing there, so we have stabilized the staffing at the senior center so that you are not ever needing to close the center because there are no staff and therefore raising liability issues. So, I think the things that we want to see happen are all good things for the senior center. We are trying to make sure the staffing is good, and we're trying to make sure your programming is good, and that it's expanded so that you have more access to the rec center opportunities, and that we can, we can give this community what it needs.
So Rose, I would say keep coming to those public comments and keep asking your questions, and we'll see what comes of it. So I will say that we've hit just over the 2-hour mark, and one of the questions I would have asked, and I'm going to ask it, but I don't expect an answer, is how the Select Board does in fact hear from its citizens when public comments is a very short amount of time, and how they will, this is food for thought, how you deal with a dissent in a vote that may be taken by the Select Board. So with those thoughts, I will thank Mr. Bethel for producing the Bennington Tonight Show, and John and Jeff for asking some questions, tough questions and not so tough questions, and I wish you all luck.
Well, thank you.
So,
Thank you.
good night, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.